Well, hello there, my friends, and welcome back. My name is Stephanie Safarian, and you're listening to episode 507 of Sustainable Minimalists. This is a listener-supported show about intentional and eco-friendly minimalist living. On today's show, we are taking the first step towards reclaiming our humanity. Oh my goodness. Yes, more specifically, we are seeking to get more in touch with our emotional selves so that we can cultivate compassion for the planet, yes, but also for fellow human beings. And we're going to do all of that in 45-ish minutes. Now, let me back up and let me say that this conversation today was recorded prior to last week's presidential election here in the United States. And holy moly, listening back to this conversation after the election was a powerful experience for me. If the world is not looking the way you want it to at this moment in time, whether it be due to the climate crisis or with regard to the potential mass deportation of millions of people, or with regard to the stripping away of women's rights, LGBTQ plus rights, my guest argues today that solving the problem, whatever the problem is, starts by going inward, by cultivating your own emotional health. Because when we're healthy on the inside, when we've healed our wounds on the inside, our external reality begins to reflect that. I do hope that, again, if you're feeling uncertain about the way the world is going, and perhaps you don't. If you don't, I'll be honest, this conversation might not be for you. But if you are feeling like I am, uncertain about the way the world is going, I hope you will receive some comfort from today's conversation. Or as my guest likes to say, I hope you will receive some guideposts to help you along your journey navigating big feelings and uncertain times. My guest today is Jeff Golden. He is the author of Reclaiming the Sacred, Healing Our Relationships with Ourselves and the World. Jeff has been on the show before. His first appearance is linked in the show notes. But I will say there's no tips or tricks or action steps today. I personally am feeling exhausted, mentally, emotionally, just drained. So today's conversation is just for listening and just for reflection. Jeff, so happy to have you back on the show a second time. I must say I don't invite guests on a second time all that often, but I'm so happy you're here. How are you?
I'm great, and I feel the same way. I don't know if you remember last time, but I got dubbed the president of your fan club, so I'm here to try and reinforce that some more.
Well, we're continuing a conversation that we started on your first appearance on the show. I believe we're on the show back over the summer. So I definitely, listeners, suggest you go back, push pause on this episode, go back and listen to our first conversation, which is linked in the show notes. But for anybody who doesn't want to do that, why don't we
Yeah,
recap the gigantic themes that we discussed the first time around? And they were quite oversized. So take it away.
I love it. One of the central pieces, I think, for people to take away from that and to bridge into our conversation today is the fact that researchers, economists, psychologists have determined that money plays a very tiny role in our overall well-being, roughly 2 to 4%. And in the last episode, we really dove into how that can be, even though for some of us that might seem impossibly low. As you come out the other side, it seems actually, on the contrary, quite obvious that it could only play a tiny role in our happiness, given so many other things that are really important. And at the same time, not only does money not contribute a lot to our well being overall, except when we really need it to meet our basic needs, the pursuit of money and materialism, one of the foremost researchers in this field was quoted as saying that materialism is toxic for our happiness. And the pursuit of happiness, making money and stuff important, generally tends to crowd out the things that really do matter. But the other thing that you and I got to by the end that I think is important for people to recognize is that this question of if money is so not important to our well being, then why does it become so important in so many people's lives and in our society? And a brief little summary might be that we pursue money and stuff to the degree that we are lacking the things that really do matter. when we do not feel a sense of purpose in our lives, when we do not have relationships that are nourishing to us or a sense of place and belonging, of self value, if we're feeling fearful or insecure, those kinds of things, then we tend to pursue money and stuff and work more often as a way of compensating for that to make ourselves feel a little better or to distract ourselves from those feelings. Again, we dive into that much more in depth in the last one, but I think a good foundation for people starting out this conversation today with us.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering though, if happiness is not found in money or in stuff, or certainly in the amassing of stuff, where does it come from?
There are really two realms that I like to look at. One is the world around us, and one is the world within us. And as far as the world around us goes, relationships are the most significant factor. If you were going to just try and guess how happy someone is by observing them for, say, a week's time, the amount of time that they spend with friends and family, the number of people they have in their lives that they consider real friends who they can call on in a time of need, that would be the number one factor you could look at and gauge that person's probably pretty happy or probably not so happy. Another thing is the amount of time that we spend working. Generally speaking, if you can pay your bills, the less you're working, the happier off you are. The prime amount seems to be about 8 hours a week is the optimal number for happiness. And then there are things like the amount of time we spend watching TV and on the internet, things like that, that aren't as significant. But by far the most significant factors are the internal ones. And these have to do with our presence, a sense of gratitude and wonder, a sense of purpose. And yes, the all important, our relationship with ourselves is the single most important factor of all. And I liken this to it's not about tricking ourselves into being a certain way, experiencing gratitude or something. The research shows that these are, generally speaking, our natural way of being. And so, that expression about the glass being half full or half empty, if that's what you're looking at, is the glass is half full or empty, either one is objectively true. And so, which one do you want to inform the way that you're feeling in the world and in your life? Which one do you want to help guide the way you interact with other people and make decisions about your life? And hands down, someone who has the sense of the glass is half full is going to be much more happy and fulfilled in their lives. The mystic Persian poet Rumi once wrote something to the effect that do not seek for love. Seek instead for all of the barriers that have been erected within you against love. And I think that the wisdom of his observation centuries ago bears out in the research today, which is that, again, it's not about needing to absolutely recreate ourselves or create a totally different life. The kind of life that most of us want to live is probably already inherently bubbling within all of us. People are, generally speaking, only naturally inclined to be happy and to experience gratitude. But we are very susceptible to the environment around us. We adapt very quickly to good things and to bad. And we take on the values of the people around us. And so a lot of us get pulled in that direction of pursuing money and stuff and compromising actually our very own well being, as well as, very importantly, the well being of the environment and the creatures and the people around us. And that's part of the journey that maybe we can talk a little bit more about today is what does it look like to start to remove some of those barriers and drop into our natural selves that can just be a lot more effervescent and purposeful and with a sense of belonging and joy.
Mm, yes, what an answer. So, what I hear you saying there is there are indeed external factors that contribute to our well-being, the quality of our relationships, the quantity of our interpersonal relationships, our relationship with our profession, how much or how little we're working, certainly. But what I really want to talk to you about today, Jeff, is that relationship with ourselves. You just used the phrase dropping into ourselves, which I love. I just wrote it down and I put an asterisk next to it. I find that, at least for me, and I've said this on the show recently, but dropping into myself is not something that has traditionally come naturally to me. I have historically lived externally. And I know that doesn't make sense, but I'll try and explain it by saying my attention tends to be focused outward as opposed to inward. And going inward has to be scheduled, as in I have to actually schedule meditation and introspection on my daily to-do list, because if I don't schedule it, it doesn't happen. The looking within is not something that I traditionally, with the personality I've been given, it's just not something that comes naturally to me. It has gotten easier as I've gotten older and as I've practiced. But you argue essentially that healing our relationships with ourselves is step one to healing the planet, healing a lot of the woes that we as humanity face today. And yet,
Yeah.
going inside for so many of us, especially if we're not doing it regularly, can be really uncomfortable. What do you say to that?
First of all, I say I agree completely because you're speaking to my experience as well. And it's part of what I was referring to when I talk about our society at large, right? The culture that we're living in, which we are living in arguably one of the most materialistic societies, not only today, but of all time. The amount of money and stuff that we have today is unimaginable to many people around the world in terms of what they'll ever actually experience, and was beyond the imagination of most humans for our 300,000 year history. And so it's only natural that we ourselves are very caught up in that. In fact, I've often said that as much as I am a guide to people in thinking about these things and helping people move beyond some of those limitations, I am myself also one foot stuck right there in it myself and am constantly in the same journey you are about. I need to be intentional. I need to schedule things. I am clear that what I've glimpsed around the situation that we're in right now and the possibilities for us that I've already started to realize in my own life are really still only the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's possible. So yes, I'm right there with you. I think that part of what we can offer people in our conversation today are some guideposts, a launch pad. Obviously, it is going to take for most people a little bit of intention, even if it's 10 minutes a day or listening to this podcast once a week, things like that. But let's at least give the guideposts, and then each person is going to find their own way to how to fit that into their own lives. And with you and me being the first to admit that it's not always easy, it doesn't come naturally. One of those aspects that we talked about briefly last time that has to do with our inner world is our emotional lives. And when I talk about dropping into ourselves, that's a large part of it, I think, dropping into our felt sense of ourselves, getting out of our heads a little bit. And in this society, we are conditioned from a very early age to not be emotional, to not feel our emotions, to get past them as fast as we can, especially those ones like sadness, grief, anxiety, fear, anger. Even someone who has very recently lost someone very significant in our lives, the response often is to not bring it up, to try and distract them, to try and put positive spins on things, instead of giving people the space they need for a very natural and important and ultimately beautiful human experience. And you think about kids, and that what I was saying about a lot of this actually is natural to us. I mean, kids, most of them anyway, at a very early age, they are not sitting there evaluating whether this is worthwhile to spend time on. Is this worthy for me to feel sad or angry about or to get upset about? They just feel it, and they go through those really big feelings, and then they're on the other side and they move forward, and it's something that's been cleansed, processed, moved through. And generally the next response is they run off and want to play some more and go back to all of the joyful things and appreciating flowers and sun and birds and everything else that they just encounter around them in their daily lives. So just to offer one example of the fact that it is a natural way of being. And yes, it is also natural that we're going to need to be a little bit intentional about how to cultivate this part of ourselves.
Yeah, kids feel their feelings, don't they? I'm thinking about
They sure do.
my own children. I have one daughter who feels her feelings much louder than the other, but they both have their ways of feeling their feeling, letting it pass through, and then moving on. But we've lost that along the way, or many of us adults have
Yeah.
lost that skill along the way. And a guest I interviewed recently mused that one of the reasons, perhaps, that culturally we have lost this ability to feel our feelings is that it's easier to sell things to people who are unhappy. What do you think about that?
I think that's absolutely factually true. The research supports what you're saying. I also think if we look back bigger picture and ask ourselves, how did we specifically as a culture become so disconnected from emotions and from a sense of wonder, from so many of the things that really do matter? Again, that one about our relationship with ourselves being really important. Historically, I think that one of the things that happened is that in European society, there was this tremendous movement that was very powerful and empowering around science and knowledge and what it meant to know things and what was really important. And there was this huge jump into our heads and facts and information. And with that, we started to not trust or put down the felt sense of the world, our emotions, and that aspect of being human. And I think that's a large part of how we explain the difference in, for example, the cultural contact between Europeans and the Native Americans and a lot of the immense violence that came with the Europeans. Specifically, I think we talked about this last time as one example, the 300 million bison that in about 100 years were exterminated by the Europeans, whereas this other people had lived next to them for 10,000 years and coexisted with them in a relationship that was both they needed each other and there was a sort of a sacred interwovenness of their lives and how they experienced the world. To just offer one really brief example, but yes, it is definitely easier to sell things to people who are unhappy and to not have to deal with a whole lot of the other grievances that they might have or be thinking about if they had a little more time to get engaged and think about those things. And also, I do think that just culturally, a lot of us are very out of touch with our emotional selves, our felt sense of the world. And again, something we for us to explore a little bit more our relationships with ourselves. And that is very intimately related with our sense of the world and our sense of interconnectedness, our sense of wonder, our sense of presence. I'll share one more example to help us dive in that direction. Sharon Salzberg, a prominent meditation teacher here in the United States, I think it was 2001 maybe, she was at a conference in India with the Dalai Lama. And each of the main people involved in a sort of a circle conversation got to ask the Dalai Lama a question. Now, the Dalai Lama being one of the foremost figures in Buddhist tradition, Tibetan Buddhism. And she asked, "What do you think of self hatred?" And what she was trying to get at was this cycle that she'd experienced in so many of her sort of clients and friends and family, this persistent voice in our heads of just putting ourselves down, of feeling worthless. And for so many reasons, things that have been done to us, things that we have done, things that we've been told about what we should be like, or things that are wrong with us. So many things we internalize, especially when we're children. So she asked, "What do you think of self hatred?" And the Dalai Lama turned to the interpreter and they talked for a minute. And he asked her to clarify. And so she did, gave some of the examples that I was just talking about. The interpreter and the Dalai Lama talked about it again for a little while. And he said, "I have thought that I am a very knowledgeable person about the nature of human beings. And yet I am absolutely stymied and blown away by what you're describing here. How could anyone feel that way or think that way about themselves? We all have what he called Buddha nature, but which we might just say fundamentally is we're each miraculous, we're each wondrous. Again, in some ways, it's the glass half full or half empty. There are lots of things that humans do that are awful, and each of us has things that could be looked at as shortcomings, things that we've done that we're not happy with, things we wish we were better at. But fundamentally, what's also true is that we are absolutely wondrous, miraculous. And sometimes, especially in this society, it takes something like the birth of a child or a brush with death or just some kind of day we have where we suddenly just see the light in a different way. We have a moment and we get to see the trees or the flowers or hear a bird, and something just cracks open and we can feel it and see it. Maybe it's bigger than that. Maybe it's even just a real sense of oneness with the universe that some of us sometimes have unexpectedly or planned. But that is also a foundation for the truth of what we are, of who we are. And that's what the Dalai Lama was referring to. And what I find really powerful about the story is it speaks to the cultural element of how we feel about ourselves. That the sort of constant negative talk or putting ourselves down or feeling like there's something just fundamentally wrong with us, which in the United States has been documented as something that is almost universal for all of us, whether we're conscious of it or it's unconscious. It is largely a cultural thing. And there's this possibility that raised in different ways, with different values, with different perspectives, that might not be how we feel about ourselves. And that is something that is not only a guidepost for all of us, but can be a powerful reminder of what is possible. It's not just something that's lost to us because of where we're born, but that's part of who we are inherently. And bit by bit, day by day, intention by intention, maybe 10-minute meditation by 10-minute meditation, as you said, we're able to allow that part of ourselves to blossom more and more. It's not overnight, but with every tiny shift that we make, every blossoming, every opening, there's just a tiny shift in the direction we head in our lives and how we feel in our lives. And over the course of our lives, even a tiny change, we end up in a very different place. So I find that it can be discouraging because it's a reminder of everything that we're swimming in, but also very heartening because it's, again, I think maybe it's not always common sense that this is natural to who we are. It can feel like fighting an uphill battle, and ultimately we're trying to trick ourselves into just feeling like we're miracles. We're worthy of love and joy. The world is beautiful. It feels almost like we're tricking ourselves, but instead, actually, it's probably the opposite is a little bit more true. We've been conditioned the other way to look at the world in such a oftentimes dreary and mechanical way that we miss out on so much of what is really our right to have in terms of our experience of ourselves in the world.
Wild wants to shake up throwaway culture of everyday bathroom products with refillable products that actually work. I switched to Wild deodorant over 2 years ago, and I have never looked back. Wild deodorant is made with safe and clean ingredients. There are no harsh chemicals, no talc, no aluminum, no salt, no parabens, and all their scents are absolutely amazing. Shipping is available worldwide, so you can get Wild wherever you are. Wild also offers subscription options, so you never run out. Subscribe and receive regular refills delivered straight to you. Go Wild today with 20% off your first order when you use code SUSTAINABLE20 at checkout. Go to wearewild.com/US and use code SUSTAINABLE20 at checkout for 20% off. Or you can simply click the link in the episode description. Enjoy. So I have some thoughts swirling around in my head, Jeff, and I'm just going to throw them out there and see where you go with them.
Good. I want to hear them.
It sounds to me like what you're touching on is the truth that how we feel about ourselves impacts how we show up in the world. And not only impacts how we show up in the world, but how we behave, how we influence, how we change our external environment. And what I'm alluding to here is essentially the climate crisis. Every morning I turn on NPR. I hear a devastating climate story that bums me out. Just this morning, it was about the Amazon River drying up because of the drought. Like every morning, different story, but same trajectory towards my day. I wake up happy, and then slowly the news trickles down and affects my mood. But back to my point, how we feel about ourselves impacts how we show up, how we treat things and beings and others outside of ourselves. And so if we're disconnected from ourselves on the inside, how can healing ourselves, how can reconnecting with ourselves lead to deeper external interconnectedness? That's the question. And if you need me to explain more, I'll try, but those are the thoughts.
No, I love it. I love it. First of all, just to underscore that the way you're describing it is exactly right. That's exactly what the research shows. Robert Holden, a psychologist whose work I really admire and who I quote a lot in my book, Reclaiming the Sacred, he has what he calls the self principle. And it's exactly what you just described. The quality of our relationship with ourselves affects the quality of our relationship with everybody and everything. That means the people in our lives, our loves, our family, our work. It affects our relationship with happiness, with the environment. Everything is understood and filtered through the lens of how we feel about ourselves. And one of the very specific findings has to do with the amount of love that we feel for ourselves and the amount of love that we are able to feel for others and express for others, and the amount of love that we are able to receive from others. These are all very intimately related to each other. And the more that we have what Rumi was referring to as these barriers within us to love, it's not just this, how do you feel about yourself every day, which I think quite obviously is going to affect how happy we are, right? Like the more of these negative messages that we've internalized and either hidden away or maybe have right there on our shoulder crying out at us constantly is only naturally going to limit how happy we are in our lives, regardless of whatever else is happening. But what is also clear is that there are, to some degree, then limitations on how much and how we express love for other people. And one of the foremost scholars in this area, Brene Brown, talks about this. She says, I hated this part of the research because what I wanted to believe was that I could just love my children so richly and unconditionally, despite the fact that I had internalized these negative beliefs about myself. And the way that she explained it was that to some degree, what it comes down to is that we cannot avoid that the conditions we place on ourselves as being worthy of happiness, we also place on others, including our children, even if we don't want to, even if we think that they should not be subjected to these things, even if we don't think we should, to the degree that it's there, it does, it impacts us. And I think also there's a quality of, to the degree that we experience love, and that can be our just the daily experience of it, how much we feel good about ourselves, or it can be these bursts, these glances that we have that I mentioned earlier, of just these moments of appreciating ourselves and feeling loved, these peak experiences. But those open windows onto the beauty and worthiness of others as well. So the more that we experience that firsthand immediately in ourselves, opens up these possibilities for other people. And then that last piece is very important too, because so many of us who would like to experience more love in our lives and we want it from other people, but we've got these barriers within us to experiencing it for and of ourselves. It's the same barrier that gets thrown up to other people. We want to be loved by other people, and other people's love can be profoundly therapeutic as well as obviously beautiful and meaningful, and it can nourish happiness in our lives. The possibilities it opens up for us in the world, they do relate directly to the kinds of things that are happening around the world, like global warming. And great news, they also offer this feedback opportunity where we're going to be letting more and more love in and experiencing more and more of the happiness that comes with that at the same time. To just maybe draw more directly that connection, as I mentioned earlier, and we talked about the last time in our conversation, fundamentally, the pursuit of money and stuff for so many of us comes down to trying to make up for a lack of the things that really do matter. It's also a cultural thing and speaks to broadly a poverty in our culture and an absence of these things that really matter. But the more that we feel good about ourselves, the more that we are experiencing a sense of gratitude, presence, wonder in our lives, the more that we are feeling a range of emotions, the more that we are spending time with friends and family. We have a sense of connection with people around us. Money and stuff becomes so much less important. Whereas when we're feeling an absence of those, or we're feeling insecure in our lives, fearful, then money and stuff and work become a big time filler, something that a lot of us turn to. And so when you look at the things that we're doing to other creatures and other people and the environment, and all of it in the name of more money and more stuff, once you start to pull out of that, it's both obvious and boggling the things that we are doing to the planet when the gain for us is either extremely little or is actually negative overall. As I mentioned, that pursuit of money and stuff being something that actually, for most of us, limits our happiness and our pursuit of the things that matter and our ability to live the lives that we're really called to. And so the analogy we talked about last time that I really love is it's we're all in this box and we're tumbling down this hill and we keep going over these cliffs and we can see that there are some really huge cliffs coming up ahead. Okay, the Amazon is drying up. Okay, potentially 50% of all species will be gone by the end of this century. Like, we need to do as much as we can inside the box to stop ourselves from going over those really huge cliffs. But fundamental to really turning the corner as a society, but also, again, the opportunity for each of us as individuals is to step outside that box and start to perceive the world and live in the world in a different way and see that the possibilities for us in our society are vastly greater than what we sometimes perceive within the box, where we're just doing our best to get by. But ultimately, what we're still doing is trying to plug those holes with money and stuff, which ultimately is just going to keep us moving in that direction of those big cliffs. So we need to do what we can in the meanwhile to slow the pace, the rapid race toward those cliffs. And it's really important that all of us recognize that there's something fundamental here that not only needs to be tended to, but that we deserve to tend to. Because here we are in our one wild and precious life. What do we each deserve? So much more than what so many of us are being offered by this culture and spoon fed by it.
Wow. Mic drop moment, Jeff. My Lord.
You asked a big question.
Well, yeah. Oh, and I got a big answer in return. I'm just thinking to myself, rhetorical question, but is our climate crisis, are these daily climate catastrophe headlines really just a visual representation of the lack of self-love that we individually, and when you add up all of us individuals together collectively, are feeling? Is it really just a visual representation of an inner lack, a lack of self-love? And if the answer is yes, first of all, let me just say, I can hear some critics listening right now, and they're rolling their eyes and they're saying, oh my goodness, Jeff and Stephanie are so out of touch. We're not going to heal the climate crisis by healing our inner wounds. So I guess the question is, number one, what would you say to the critics? And number two, if you can convince the critics, how do we do this internal work that you speak of? I hear a lot about therapy. Is it as simple as going to therapy? I think you're going to say no.
Actually, on that one, I'm going to say that for some people, yes, yeah, that is an answer. But let's speak to the critics first, and then let's talk about some of the directions forward. I think that, as I mentioned, it is largely a function of our materialism and the pursuit of money and stuff is largely a function of these absences. The reason that in this society we tend to weight those so heavily is to a large degree about these absences. So the research backs that up. It's fundamentally true. Another piece is what we talked about culturally. And those two are sometimes hard to tease out from each other. But it is true that in our society, there has been a lot of heady intellectual exploration of the importance of economic growth, right? One of the foundations of this country and our economy is the idea that more is better, and that the more stuff and money that we have, we will be happier. And it's just been a given in economics that money and stuff are a stand in for well being. And yet, economists universally today are aware of and talk about increasingly in their classes. And the former head of the Fed, Ben Bernanke, he talked about it at a college commencement ceremony recently about exactly this, the fact that ultimately money and stuff don't do a whole lot for our well being and in fact can detract from our well-being. So that part right up front, anyone who wants to be a naysayer about that, there are all kinds of complexities and nuances that can be explored around it, but the fundamental facts are very clear, in place, and acknowledged by pretty much everyone. So then that question about, well, is it through healing ourselves that we're going to address the global warming crisis? First of all, as I already mentioned, we still need to do a tons of the other things, just politically, economically, the transition to green energy, reducing our consumption of energy and of products, all of those kinds of things are going to be very important. But one of the things we should keep track of, first of all, is that if what is driving all of that is this deep, I'm going to call it an illness, a poverty of spirit. I think we talked about this last time, but Mother Teresa said that the poverty of spirit she experienced in the United States was greater than any she'd experienced anywhere. And this was a woman who worked with the poorest of the poor in Calcutta, India. And so, to the degree that not only global warming, but repeatedly throughout our several hundred-year history as a country and beyond the United States as well. It's not just a United States thing, but if you look at the things that we do to the environment, to other people, and to other creatures in this larger pursuit of more money and stuff, and if fundamentally that is being driven by this poverty of spirit, this profound unhappiness, and I think you don't have to go further than the daily headlines that you were talking about, whether it's global warming or politics around anger and people just being not happy fundamentally. Where do we channel that? Where do we go with that? It does go into anger and consumption and money and stuff. And that's how we try to placate ourselves. As well, for a lot of us, of course, it's alcohol and drugs. And in this society, 1 in 20 of us considers suicide every year. So those are the statistics around well-being in the United States, and they are very clearly driving so much of what we're doing to the environment, to each other and other creatures. And so there is a piece here where I think doing the work of healing ourselves, getting outside that box, reconnecting with the things that really do matter, is a fundamental part of what needs to be done here. At the same time, like I said, one of the beautiful sort of dovetails here is that it's not only what our society needs and deserves, but it's what each of us needs and deserves. Regardless of where our society goes overall or where politics and economics take us, where all of this inertia is going, we're going to all hopefully keep doing our best to address that. But great news, if we take the time to nourish more joy and well being in our lives through some of these simple things like taking care of ourselves, healing some of our wounds, spending a little more time with family and friends, a little less time pursuing money and stuff. Yes, society overall will benefit, but we win. It's just a win. At the end of the day, each of us deserves that. And if there were nothing else coming out of it, we should each be making a little bit of time and setting some intention around that, anyways, is how I approach it.
Mm. What I hear you saying there, Jeff, is yes, sure, we're rich in stuff, but we're poor in spirit, to take Mother Teresa's words. We're rich in stuff, poor in spirit. Where does, or how does, I suppose is a better way to say that, how does spirituality fit into this conversation?
I can speak just about some of the baseline facts around people who have a sense of spirituality or are connected with religion where they have a sense of belonging, of being loved, or a sense of place does nurture our happiness more. I think looking at the bigger picture and spirituality, not necessarily specific religions, but speaking more broadly about religiosity, if you will, and spirituality, it does very much connect with what we're talking about, our sense of ourselves, our sense of the world, and the ways that a lot of us have been conditioned out of experiencing the wonder in the world. The entire last chapter of my book really looks at some of the ways that so many of us are conditioned out of experiencing wonder. I know that I myself, as a child, felt a tremendous sense of love and wonder and in the world and in myself. And yet, the religious context in which I was raised, that wasn't mirrored. What I was raised with around religion and spirituality was a lot of rules, some very specific ideas around the nature of spirit and wonder, and it all got crammed into this tiny box. And again, speaking just factually, statistically, I forget what it is, but I think it's something like 60% of people who today consider themselves not religious were raised within a very specific religious tradition. It wasn't that it was absent. It was that they were raised in a context that wasn't nourishing them, that wasn't speaking to their hearts, to their spirits in some ways. And so we're trying to find ways to reconnect with that outside of that. And again, part of the joyful answer here is that so much of the wonder and love that is inherent in us and in the world, it's more about removing those barriers than needing to go and find something entirely new. It's about allowing ourselves to experience those things outside of some of the boxes that we've been raised in. I'm going to butcher the quote, but there was someone who talked about those people who torch the tiny gods that are placed on pedestals in some religious contexts and say, those don't exist. We should turn away from all of that. And then there are the people who put all of their faith and hope in really a lot of these little tiny figures and tiny gods and ideas that we have. And if we don't find either of those appealing, we think that there's nothing else there. Whereas what this religious figure in the Unitarian Universalist Church was pointing to was the fact that there's actually so much more beyond the tiny boxes that we often are just presented. And it goes for the world of money and stuff. And I think that goes for the world of spirituality as well. And just a sense of wonder and joy that there is so much for us to connect with in ourselves and beyond ourselves that's just available to us if we can get past a lot of the conditioning that we've often been presented with.
I guess I'll just speak for myself and say I've been meditating for probably about 8 years now, since my first daughter was born. And it started as a way to get, or hopefully get, some control of my stress and anxiety. And as I religiously meditated, religiously, I shouldn't use that word. I should say diligently meditated.
I like that.
Spirituality found me. Like, I wasn't looking for it. I certainly wasn't looking for it, but it was always within me, let's say. And I provided the quiet and the space for spirituality to come to the forefront. So I would love to end our conversation today, Jeff, by perhaps offering some suggestions to listeners who are ready to go in the direction of breaking out of the box by going inward, ironically. I would say I'll start, and then you can maybe add to the list. I would say start meditating, do it every day, 5 to 10 minutes, write it down. Absolutely. And even if you don't think it's working, just keep doing it. I would say nurture those relationships, those close relationships with people in your life. I would say spend less time on technology, on social media in particular. What would you add?
Oh, I love all of those. I think for some people, you mentioned therapy. For some people, like Alcoholics Anonymous AA circles, for some people, religious counselors, and some people, it is good friends. But to consider a little bit more and lean in that direction of considering talking with other people about some of these places that we hold, what psychologists call shame, this sense of not worthiness, whether it was something that was done to us, something we've done, these standards we've internalized about who we should be, how we should be in the world. I would encourage everyone to just find little places to bring a little bit of that into their lives. And yes, for some people, therapy is hugely therapeutic. For some people, again, AA absolutely changes their lives and their families' lives. So there are lots of opportunities out there, but I would add that to your list. And then the final thing I would love to offer is if we have just 3 minutes, again, for me, part of my hope is that whether I'm able to offer someone the specifics of where they're going to go, I can give them some guideposts. And there's just a single page in my book that I would love to offer, just an excerpt that I think points us in that direction. And it's from a chapter called Living in Mystery, Magic, and Miracle. And it begins with, the book Charlotte's Web tells the story of a pig, Wilbur, who lives on a farm, and a spider, Charlotte, who weaves messages into her web about how wonderful Wilbur is, so that he will not be slaughtered by the owners of the farm. The following conversation takes place among two of the townspeople after the first message appears. Have you heard about the words that appeared in the spider's web? Asked Mrs. Arable nervously. Yes, replied the doctor. Do you understand it? Asked Mrs. Arable. Understand what? Do you understand how there could be any writing in a spider's web? Oh no, said Dr. Dorian. I don't understand it. But for that matter, I don't understand how a spider learned to spin a web in the first place. When the words appeared, everyone said they were a miracle, but nobody pointed out that the web itself is a miracle. Or we might add that the spider itself is a miracle, and the light the web shone by, and the breath and the beating hearts of these two people having this conversation, and the sky, the earth, me, you, everything. I may, like Dr. Dorian, be using the word miracle in a slightly different way than people commonly use it, but I think it's really a better use of the word. It invites us to see the world in a way that is not only more beautiful and alive, but that is also fundamentally more honest and true. It's like in a story where someone looks at a bookshelf when the light is exactly right and a door reveals itself, opening onto an entire other magical world. That is the universe we live in, one grounded entirely in magic, held together in magic, and recreated every moment in magic. All we have to do is get a slightly different angle on just what a miracle is and let the just right light of that concept, miracle, reveal to us the magic all around us. It is an invitation to awe, to presence, to gratitude, and to greater happiness. You pointed out, Stephanie, a lot of that just flows in and comes naturally without us even looking for it if we just start to walk that path and create a little more space for it. So that would be my greatest wish for everyone listening.
I like that, Jeff. Yeah, it's not about doing more. It's less about that and more about just stopping, like stopping running from yourself. Stop, pause, and say hello to your inner world.
I love that. And notice that in saying hello to yourself, you'll start to notice all the ways that the world around you is saying hello as well.
I love it.
Yeah.
What a conversation, Jeff. Oh, gosh, I love this.
Such a delight.
Tell us about what's going on in your life. I know you have a course starting in January. Tell us all about
Yeah.
it.
Yes. So I do offer an online course. It's 6 weeks for anyone who wants to dive into this a little bit further. It's very experiential and it's by donation. So you choose how much you want to gift me for this work. That's on my website. You can look that up at reclaimingthesacred.net. I limit those to 12 people. So it's a very intimate experience. So if that speaks to someone, please be in touch with me. And then, of course, there's the book itself. As I mentioned before, whether you're someone who reads books from front page to the end or not, what a lot of people have found is that just by flipping open random pages in the book or looking at the chapter titles, they find that there are things in I spent 10 years writing this and there are thousands of researchers working here, that there is information and ideas and feelings that have been waiting for people and they're in a lot of these pages. So whether you get it at the library or just buy it online or at your local bookstore, I would encourage everyone to have this be something that helps them in their journey. This book, it's called Reclaiming the Sacred, and my name is Jeff Golden, and I'm not only an author, but I'm the president of the Stephanie Fan Club, and I'm so glad we got to have this second conversation.
I'm the president of the Jeff Golden Fan Club, and I will just say your book is phenomenal. Listeners, it's linked in the show notes. Highly recommended by me. Jeff, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. I was bummed out by the Amazon drying up, but now you've given me hope and you put a smile back on my face again for today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Listeners, that's a wrap. My friends, show notes at mamaminimalist.com/507. I will say, after talking to Jeff, I signed up for his course. It starts in January, just 12 of us. If you're interested and would like to do it with me, I'd love to do it with you. Link to sign up is in the show notes. Reach out if you need me. Hug your loved ones close and take care.